national, gruppono de men, l'international, la sara, la genre men. 'Tis the final conflict. Let each stand in his place. The international shall be the human race. Such is the chorus of the international hymn of the working class. But far from being written in victory, the International by Eugene Potier was written in commemoration of the greatest mass slaughter in Europe of the 19th century, that of the Paris Commune. The Paris Commune, which is declared on March 18, 1871, is a culmination of the class wars in France. And in fact, France in the course of the 19th century is the model country of showing the class divisions between the aristocracy, the bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie, the peasantry, and the emerging working class proletariat. Already in 1848, something called the February Revolution breaks out, when the mass venality, cynicism, corruption, utter decadence of the so-called July monarchy, the reign of King Louis Philippe, is overthrown in late February. And when it's overthrown, there's immediate tensions. This is the third revolution that had swept France since 1789. Already in 1830, the workers had gone and been the fighting force that had overthrown the venality of the last Bourbon king of France, Charles X. But though the workers fought the revolution in 1830, they were deprived of any of the fruits of the victory. Rather, all of the fruits were gathered by the financial bourgeoisie. And by this time, France is the center of stock market swindling, financial chicanery, dubious actions. In fact, this is the tradition of French politics to at least World War I, if not later, that virtually every leader of France during this time has an extremely shady past of that. And the workers realize this in 1848, and they don't want to be deprived. And they were strong enough in the original revolution whereby they were able to force a Ministry of Labor. And the leader of the Ministry of Labor, Louis Blanc, was sort of the first social democratic politician, the socialist that is convinced that he can work within the system, and by making him a member of the government, all will be fine and well, and the workers will flourish. Well, no sooner has Louis Blanc been made the Minister of Labor than the government exiles him to the other side of the Seine River of this. And when his so-called Luxembourg Commission establishes a few workshops for the unemployed, rather than treating the unemployed with dignity, they are treated as virtual prisoners with disgraceful working conditions. But this isn't enough for the provisional government. They try to end the Commission of Labor, the so-called right to work, in mid-May. This leads to a clash where the revolutionaries fail, seeing that any attack on the Labor Commission is going to arouse the masses, the workers of Paris. In June 1848, the French government cynically goes and closes down the Luxembourg Commission. Sure enough, the workers revolt, but far from doing anything immediately about that, the French government goes and gathers soldiers from outside of Paris. It allows the workers to stay on the barricades for about 3 days, and then it sends in the troops and crushes the barricades and the workers. But just crushing the rebellion is not enough for ruling France at this time, led by bourgeois Republicans. Rather, they tell the soldiers, keep shooting, and eventually upwards of 3,000 workers are massacred in the wake of the June days of 1848 of this. And no sooner are the workers so crushed than soon ruling France is cynically divided between the old legitimists of the Bourbon dynasty, the supporters of Louis Philippe and his grandson, the so-called Orleans dynasty, and the biggest pretender of the day, the Donald Trump of the day, Louis Bonaparte. Louis Bonaparte is the nephew of Napoleon I. He is raised when his uncle is still the dominating emperor of not just France, but of all of Europe. And by the 1830s, after having his family exiled on the overthrow of Napoleon in 1815, Louis Bonaparte is projecting himself as the pretender. He keeps engaging in various pushes. He keeps failing. He keeps being arrested. He keeps escaping along the way while projecting himself as this visionary who is going to bring back to France the glorious empire of his uncle. In 1848, as tensions are soaring in France with the June days, Louis Bonaparte returns to France. His name is magic. He is elected to the Constituent Assembly, and it draws up the Constitution that leads to presidential elections in December, and he receives upwards of 5 million votes. The second contender is General Cavaignac, the Republican who oversaw the massacres in June 1848 of that, and Louis Bonaparte becomes president of France on this. And soon there is this cynical ploy, cynical power move between the so-called Party of Order, the Orleanists, the Bourbons, the bourgeois Republicans, and Louis Bonaparte. And as the members of the Party of Order squabble, attack the popular masses, Louis Bonaparte builds his machine. And the work within the system crowd is saying, but we only have to we only have to suffer from Louis Bonaparte for 4 years. He's up for re-election in May 1852. And we'll not have to defeat him because he is limited by the Constitution to only one term of this. And right when they're smugly plotting, who are we going to elect? Is it going to be Joe Biden, Barack Obama, or Jimmy Carter, or somebody on that level? Lo and behold, to the absolute surprise of the Party of Order, Louis Bonaparte overthrows the Second French Republic on December 10th, 1851. He soon declares himself the Emperor of the French and declares the Second French Republic. And the Second French Republic is a good example of the modern Wall Street Democrats in action. It is a public-private partnership. It is a means of going and enriching politically well-connected insiders. It is also the world leader of urban renewal. And in particular, in the course of the 1850s, 1860s, a key assistant of Louis Bonaparte is Eugene Haussmann. Haussmann is his English pronunciation. And Haussmann engages in urban renewal of coming through and virtually destroying old working class Paris. Because in place of working class Paris, you need to have the tourist Paris of this. You need a Paris filled with grand boulevards along the way. A further purpose of urban renewal in Paris is by putting in these huge, straight, grand boulevards, is to get rid of the old-fashioned twisting, turning street system, because the street system with the all sorts of dead ends had been part and parcel of public protest since the Revolution of 1830, the resort to the barricades. And really until the French Revolution of 1830, the barricade fighting is unknown of this. And suddenly you have armed workers that are able to seal off key streets within Paris and hold their own for a while against the police, the military of this. And the whole idea of Haussmann of this is if we put in these grand boulevards, we can pull in the artillery and just blast out the barricades thoroughly on that. Additionally, Louis Bonaparte, who is by now known as Napoleon III, part of his whole efforts of this is a police state. He has massive repression. And actually, the repression is amazingly successful. For about 20 years, there is just this fog where the workers of Paris really cannot debate politics, thereupon come up with new ideas, solutions, criticize various proposals of that. Insofar as they're doing anything, they're still fighting the battles of the Great French Revolution of 1848. Added to all of this, Louis Bonaparte is an outright imperialist. Beginning with the July monarchy in 1830, France is strongly building its empire. It engages in a vicious war of conquest against Algeria. By the time Louis Bonaparte is in charge, it's trying to take charge of Vietnam. It joins with the British in the Opium Wars, which are clashes where the British send their warships and troops into China because China had the audacity population against all the drug dealers of England that are dumping massive amounts of opium on the people of China. And of course, this is an impermissible interference with the free market, so you have French troops joining that. Another of Louis Bonaparte's various schemes is there's been a revolution in Mexico. Benito Juarez is trying to establish a liberal secular government along the way of that. That is criminal, and Mexico is in debt. So the way you force Mexico to pay its debts is in 1861, in alignment with Britain, Belgium, other European capitalists, he sends an occupation army into Mexico of this, but just getting the debts isn't enough. He overthrows the Mexican government and he brings in a Habsburg prince from Vienna, Maximilian, to establish a new empire in Mexico as an annex of the Second French Empire. And during this time, Louis Bonaparte is constantly engaging in wars. He's fighting to crush the Roman Revolution of 1848. Then he claims to be an Italian nationalist fighting against Austria for a while. He has on and off relationships with Otto von Bismarck, who is establishing himself as the key figure in forging a united Prussia into a united Germany. But for about 20 years, Louis Bonaparte is just considered the guardian of Europe, the man whom civilization looks to as an inspiration to protect it against communism itself. However, by 1869, 1870, there are severe cracks in the Second French Empire. The venality, the corruption, the financial swindles are all catching up. For example, he has to go and jettison Baron Haussmann because Haussmann was not only destroying historic working class Paris, he was also lining his pockets in the process as part of utter corruption. And by 1870, it looks like Louis Bonaparte is in severe trouble. Have a war. And nobody understands a greater advantage of having a war at this time than Otto von Bismarck. And Bismarck had been a student of Louis Bonaparte, of the cynicism, of the double dealing, of the corruption of that itself. And he realizes how utterly corrupt and unprepared, how bluster-filled the French military is. And in the course of the summer of 1870, Bismarck provokes Louis Bonaparte to declare war against Prussia. And this is just what Bismarck wants. He has the Prussian army mobilized. He appeals to independent states in South Germany, especially around Bavaria, to protect their fatherland against the attacks of the aggressive imperialistic French along this way. And meanwhile, back in Paris, the French army is incredibly unprepared of this. It is slow in mobilization. And by the time the French army is ready to march, the German forces are already ready to attack France. And in the course of August 1870, France suffers defeat after defeat after defeat at the hands of the Prussians. This culminates near the French-Prussian border on September 2nd, 1870, at the town of Sedan, when the Prussians are overwhelmingly victorious. They capture the entire French army. They capture Louis Bonaparte and imprison him. In the wake of this, there is a revolution in Paris. Not just the everyday working people, but a lot of the bourgeoisie are disgusted with the Second Empire. They see the Second Empire as thoroughly corrupt of this, and on September 4th, they declare the end of the Second Empire, replacing it with something called the Third Republic. Somebody that is a little unhappy with this is Bismarck. He wants to restore Louis Bonaparte as Emperor of France. And part of the reason he wants to restore Louis Bonaparte is he sees what a blustering, incompetent idiot who serves more Prussia than France Louis Bonaparte is. And to his credit, Louis Bonaparte says, I'm sorry, I've been overthrown. I will say nothing whatsoever. And he soon is allowed to leave for England, where he dies within a couple of years. Amidst all of this, there's the question, well, what's going on in France? And soon there is this division of the new provisional government that forms itself into something called the Government of National Defense. Or is it the Government of National Dereliction along the way? And from the beginning, a lot of the leadership of France at this time is convinced that the enemy is not Prussia, the enemy is revolutionary Paris. And by this time, working class Paris is thoroughly defiant, thoroughly patriotic, and they are Jacobins. They are going and recalling the spirit of 1792, 1793, 1794. And at that time, amidst the French Revolution, the government of France, the Girondists, are thoroughly blundering. Something called the First Coalition, an alliance of forces of European reaction, are marching on Paris itself. The economy is breaking down. There are peasant revolts sweeping the country against the revolutionary government, and the Jacobins land up overthrowing the Girondists. They install a revolutionary dictatorship. Soon they are mobilizing the population in mass of this. They're resorting to terror to guillotine speculators, the leeches, people that are draining the blood of Paris, and suddenly the economy stabilizes. Suddenly the French army starts defeating the forces of the coalition of this, and the revolution is victorious in France itself. And soon the French Revolution has this missionary goal of sweeping through Europe, bringing the revolution elsewhere. That is the Jacobin ideal. And in 1870, Paris is again convinced that something like that needs to happen. And nobody is more outspoken of this being the revolutionary goal, the purpose of the France in the wake of its defeat by Prussia than Auguste Blanqui. Auguste Blanqui is the leading French revolutionary of the 19th century. He is born about 1805. He grows up at a time when secret societies, conspiracies, cabals, groups like the Carbonari, the Illuminati are circulating around in France and Italy, trying to bring justice, trying to bring a new world of this. And by the 1830s, Blanqui is convinced what is needed is a corps of professional revolutionaries. And at the right time, the revolutionaries are to go and to seize power. They are to throw out the existing government and speak in the name of the people, where the people will rally to them against the corrupt parasites that are the ruling class of this. And Blanqui keeps trying to make this a reality. After he fails in a revolutionary coup in 1839, he gets locked up. And unlike Louis Bonaparte, he doesn't get to escape. He doesn't have a backup of this. Following the revolution of 1848, Auguste Blanqui is freed. He lands up failing in a revolutionary attempt in Paris in May 1848 and gets locked up again of this. And he's in prison until the September Revolution of 1870. And he is seeing how corrupt, how double dealing, how venal the entire French government of national defense is. And he is convinced that the only way that France is going to win the war and lead to the revolution is by a new burst of Jacobinism. And on this basis, on October 31st, 1870, he leads a group that seizes City Hall, the Hôtel de Ville in Paris, and ousts the thoroughly venal, incompetent the government of national defense. Blanqui is on the scene, but rather than going and saying, okay, we gotta seize the means of communication, we gotta control the streets, he says, no, we're all Frenchmen. Fraternity is our outreach of this. We have to fight the Prussians, so he doesn't bother to arrest the opposition, and he actually leaves City Hall, and no sooner has he left City Hall than the forces of reaction are able to gather loyal troops. They find a secret passageway into the basement of the Hôtel de Ville, and they land up arresting the revolution. And soon they arrest Auguste Blanqui as well of this. So the things are miserable of this. And all the while, there is a cynical agreement that is starting to emerge between Bismarck and the government of national defense. Since the government of national defense sees that the real enemy is Paris, Bismarck figures that he's going to let the government of national defense crush Paris rather than having Prussian troops attack Paris. But all the while, by September 1870, Prussian troops are surrounding Paris. And typical is that the Prussian troops land up going and taking possession of Versailles, the historic monarchist capital of France, starting with Louis XIV back in the course of the 17th century of that. And in fact, that is where Wilhelm I, the King of Prussia, becomes the Emperor of the Second Reich, the new German Empire around this time of that. And all the while, the government of national defense is more trying to say, how do we betray Paris than do we assist Paris on that? And nobody is more in the forefront of this than Adolphe Thiers. Adolphe Thiers, whose name is spelled Thiers, is this veteran, cynical political operative. He's born in 1897, and by the time of the July Revolution in 1830, he's already a leading figure in the dynastic opposition who helps make Louis Philippe king of this. And for the next 40 years, whenever there is a dirty deed to be done in France, especially with the legislature, Adolphe Thiers is in the center of it. The guy is a superb liar. In fact, he is such a superb liar that he's always out there saying, I have never lied to you in my life. And you can believe I will never lie to you again on that itself. He's also a historian, and he gets rave reviews. Have you ever run into somebody? He has a great reputation. He's considered a brilliant intellectual, outstanding writer and speaker, and you find the dullest, most witless hack imaginable. In some ways, that's Adolphe Thiers. And he is so loved because he is a shining star of those that have no wit, no presentation, but they love to have somebody that tells them what they are thinking in one form or another of this. In the fall of 1870, Thiers is the French representative ambassador at large of the government of national defense. And that really doesn't do all that much, other than he gets this whole idea together that there is no hope for France in the slightest of this. He's not going to get any European support against Prussia of this. Meanwhile, the German army is starving Paris. Working conditions, living conditions, food conditions are hideous in Paris by January 1871, and the result is the capitulation of Paris late that month, at least the capitulation of the government of national defense. And among his cynical moves, Bismarck sees this and he tells the government of national defense, you have to call a national assembly of this to ratify my generous agreement. And all my generous agreement is going to say is France is going to pay a war indemnity of 5 as part of the settlement. We are also going to have the new German Empire include Alsace and Lorraine, historically speaking, German areas that have been part of France since the 17th century and much prefer France to Germany anyway on that itself. And who is it that wants to sign such an agreement of utter capitulation? And in no time, this is again pre-television, pre-telephone of this, there is a national election for the assembly. The voices of opposition have no time to mobilize, and the rurals, totally dominated by the landowners, by the monarchists, sweep the elections of February 1871. They originally meet at Bordeaux. Before long, they are in Versailles. And Versailles is the appropriate place because Versailles represents the monarchy, Paris represents the republic on this. And towards this end, on that, not only does the government of national defense under the new assembly of this make Thiers its sort of executive prime minister leader of this, it agrees to the Prussian terms of capitulation, of surrender, and soon there is a wave of reaction of this. All of the social legislation that had briefly been adopted to protect Paris during the siege is overthrown of this. The role of the creditors is in the forefront of what is going on there, but there is a problem. Versailles doesn't control Paris. Paris is an armed city. It is a city protected by a series of forts, and most of all, it is filled with armed workers. And what had happened as part of the mobilization for the Franco-Prussian War was a recreation of the National Guard. Back at the time of the 1848 revolution, the National Guard was a thoroughly bourgeois outfit. It was as much men playing soldiers as it was a military force of that. But still, when the National Guard is mobilized against the revolution in February 1848, the National Guard refuses to fire on the people. That is the crucial part of the success of the February 1848 revolution. Well, meanwhile, amidst all of this, there is this fear. Do we arm the workers? Well, if we don't arm the workers, who's going to be the cannon fodder to stand up against Prussian arms along the way? And the result is by 1870, 1871, there is not only a bourgeois National Guard in Paris, there is also a working class National Guard, and working class Paris refuses to surrender the city. They still have this Jacobin mystique that France, Paris are undefeatable, and that if everybody rallies to la patrie, to the country of this, the new Jacobin revolution is going to sweep Europe as a whole. And so by March 1871, Thiers is realizing that he has to somehow disarm Paris, because as long as the workers have their guns, he can't conquer Paris and proceed to push through the counter-revolution. Well, on this basis, on March 17th, he orders members of the army to attack Paris on early March 18th. And by this time, the National Guard has a lot of cannons scattered throughout Paris, especially in working class neighborhoods. And as long as Paris has its cannons and the armed people of the National Guard, Thiers knows that Paris is going to fight back on that. So he decides he's just going to steal the cannons. And soon the troops start marching. And an amazing part of the incompetence of the National Guard during the epoch of the Paris Commune is the National Guard is constantly taken by surprise. Time and again, it seemingly doesn't know who or what sentries are, and it is shocked to discover the aggression and the successful advances of the Versailles government of that. And so it is on the morning of March 18th, 1871, the Versailles soldiers have basically grabbed the cannons atop Montmartre, which is a high commanding spot of northeast Paris, which is an overwhelming working class neighborhood of that. But there's a problem. There's no horses available to haul the cannons down the hill and out of Paris. Part of the reason that no horses are available is a lot of them had been killed and eaten during the starvation siege of Paris in the previous winter of this. And meanwhile, the women are on the street. They're the people that are up first, and they see the soldiers and they start yelling, they start opposing this. And Paris has an amazing communication system at this time. There are drummers and there are special drum beats that are sounded when help is necessary. Church bells are instructed on occasion to sound something called the tocsin, which is a special ringing of all the bells in the area of rallying the people that Paris is in danger. And soon the masses are out flocking around the soldiers. And a lot of the soldiers realize that the Parisians are not their enemy. The officers are the enemy. And when push comes to shove, the Versailles troops refuse to fire on the people. They shoot their officers instead. And especially the execution of two generals, Clement Thomas of this and Lecomte, are considered the great, great crimes of the Commune, that how dare the workers fight back against the attacking army that is ready to shoot them down. And in the wake of this, led by Thiers, the remnants of the government of national defense all flee Paris on March 18th, 1871. And the void is filled by something called the Central Committee. And by this time, the Central Committee is a coordinating agency of the various units of the National Guard across Paris itself on that. And from the beginning, the Central Committee is not really out there as a revolutionary force of this. It sort of sees itself as a placeholder. So it doesn't do the obvious thing. Now that Versailles leadership has fled and the army is disintegrated, is you pursue the enemy, you destroy the existing forces of the Versailles who are completely disorganized, and that assures the triumph of the revolution. And the Central Committee is saying, no, we can't do that. That is not fraternity. That is not honor. That is not justice. We are not going to provoke a civil war of this. We prefer to do nothing instead along the way of that itself. And so there's something of a power void. The group that originally tries to fill the power void are the mayors of Paris. And Paris then, as today, is divided into 20 arrondissements. And the arrondissements are sort of the subsections of the city, each of which has its own city hall, its own mayor, usually an appointed official, municipal services of that. And the mayors are saying, we're all bourgeois, we all believe in law and order, and we don't want a civil war either. Let's have us in charge, and we will be the voices of the people. And against this, there is this demand that, no, we need to go and elect and create a Paris Commune. We need to have a people's council going and running Paris. The idea of the Paris Commune also goes back to the French Revolution of 1792, when revolutionary Paris forms its own commune. And in fact, during the next couple of years, known in French history as Year 2, the crucial period of the triumph of the revolution, not only is the National Convention led by the Committee of Public Safety and Robespierre in charge, so is the Paris Commune of that. The Paris Commune and starts guillotining his left-wing critics in early 1794. Robespierre just opens the way for his own fall and sort of the reaction against the French Revolution at that time. But again, I'm running out of time, and I've just gotten to the declaration of the Commune amidst all of these things over there. But more than that, there's also this idea that France has this lecherous, centralized government that is filled with bureaucrats, placeholders, venality, corruption, and that all the government does is it's there and it drains out the life force of workers, peasants through the country, and we need a decentralized country with a series of communes through the area of this. And for months, during the upheavals of the Franco-Prussian War, this idea, we need to have a Paris Commune. And so there's sort of this 10-day void between March 18th and March 28th, 1871, when the Central Committee is in charge, but isn't in charge. The mayors are in charge and aren't in charge until finally the Commune is elected proper and declared on March 28th, 1871. And unfortunately, the Commune doesn't know what it is doing either. It is filled with idealistic workers, veteran journalists, windbags. Besides a Blanquist force, it has a strong representation of the followers of Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. Proudhon was the ideologue of petty bourgeois socialism. He did not want to destroy capitalism. He simply wanted that all the workers should get together in kinds of cooperatives, small-scale enterprises, get loans, get social credit, and work together in sort of a seemingly stateless overtone. In some ways, he is considered the father of anarchy. He's the man that first coins the term anarchy, and for years he and Marx clash viciously. Proudhon, among other things, tries working with Louis Bonaparte at one time of this. He writes against the Jews. He writes against everybody he doesn't like. He's a patriarchal, anti-woman figure of that, dies in 1865, but still this idea that we can work within the system. All we need to have is sort of a cooperative capitalism and all will be well. And the crucial issue immediately comes when the Commune takes power is Paris is broke. Where is money going to come from? And actually, Paris isn't broke. Smack in the center of Paris is the Bank of France. And the Bank of France is, again, one of these public-private enterprises. It's essentially privately run and controlled, but functions in the name of the French government of that. And the obvious thing that the Commune could have done was to seize the Bank of France itself. That would have destroyed the entire credit system of the Versailles government. And the bankers of the Bank of France know this. And when the Commune approaches the Bank of France, the banker says, well, we have a history. Whoever is in charge is the government, and we work with them. How much money do you want? And so the Bank of France basically gives the Commune free credit to at least buy food and for basic social welfare activities of that. And at the same time it is providing money to the Commune, it's providing 10 times as much money to the Versailles government. But among those that is very, very worried about the outbreak of the Commune is Bismarck. And by this time, he has more than 100,000 French soldiers as prisoners of war. He wants to get rid of the prisoners of war, and he basically tells Thiers and the Versailles government, I will leave Paris alone. I will give you these prisoners of war. You are going to indoctrinate them that the Parisians are subhuman who need to be exterminated as vermin of that. And meanwhile, the Commune, again, fails to seize the initiative. It has sort of this defensive mentality. Time and again, it lands up being surprised by Sorte's aggression of the Versailles government. And by this time, April 1871, Thiers and the Versailles government are very blunt. They are going to drown Paris in a sea of blood. When communards are captured and marched to Versailles, they have to face a mob of the bourgeoisie, of the aristocracy that beat them, kill them, abuse bodies, where the jailers are often the epitome of humanity compared to the mob of the rich in Versailles. Out of this, and all the while back in Paris, they're preaching fraternity of this. Efforts are made by the Commune to try to reorganize the defense force, and this runs into a complete dead end of the Central Committee of the National Guard. We are not going to have a unified defense. Each arrondissement is going to go and defend itself of this, and there is no coordination going on at this time. And at times, the members of the National Guard seem to be boys playing soldiers. They order very elaborate uniforms that they strut around in. And while at the one hand, the Parisian government goes and abolishes conscription and the standing army, it simultaneously declares that all of the male population above 17 years of age to at least 40 years of age are automatically members of the National Guard. And there's a lot of draft dodgers that don't want to participate in all of that. Among the people that do want to participate in the National Guard are a large number of women. And in the course of 1871, there is this mass women's mobilization in Paris. Not only do women dress up in the uniforms of the National Guard and take to the barricades and shoot back against the Versailles of this, they're also demanding sexual equality. There is an extreme anti-clericalism in the Commune. At least half of the marriages or living arrangements in working class Paris at this time are not blessed by the church. That. Meanwhile, as the Versailles is increasingly going and executing soldiers and anybody it captures from the Commune declares that it is going to take hostages. And if Versailles keeps going and killing communards, it's going to have to kill its hostages. And among the people they seize is Archbishop Dubois. And Archbishop Dubois is something of a figurehead figure there. And the Commune says, here, we'll exchange him for Blankie. And Thiers doesn't want Blankie, who's being held a prisoner on the English Channel coast at this time, back into Paris. He doesn't want Dubois either out of that because he fears that Dubois might be a conciliator of that. And Paris doesn't kill its hostages. And when it doesn't, that's a green light to Thiers and company to execute ever more members that are captured on this time. There is social legislation that is passed by the Commune. It is idealized as a place where the council is constantly changing with the instant recall of officials that do not go and carry out the demands of their constituencies. There is a strong political club life where almost every night there is a political meeting or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 sweeping Paris at this time. There is efforts at a social safety net going on, but still by early May, the Commune seems to be this horror story where you know something just absolutely awful is going to happen of this, and nothing can seemingly be done to prevent it. Something can be done to prevent it. Among the groups that are trying to preach reconciliation, of all things, are the Masons, who are an overwhelmingly middle class, thoroughly pro-establishment group. The provinces do not support the reactionary National Assembly. They actually are in favor of going and finding some sort of conciliation. Some of the towns of Paris, especially Marseille, Lyon, have brief live communes of their own of this, but Paris is isolated. The reptile press, as Marx calls the journalists of the day, have a smear machine fully equal to anything that exists currently other than that. And increasingly, they are bringing in rural soldiers into Versailles, peasants that just automatically hate Paris, with the message being, let's go on a communard hunt, as they call it. We're going to invade Paris and we're going to shoot down anybody and everybody that we possibly can. And all the while, Paris has this strange defensive mentality. It is convinced that the fortresses surrounding it are going to go and keep the Versailles from breaking into the walls of the city. Once again, sentries are not present of this, and the upshot is that the Versailles managed to breach the walls of Paris on May 21st, 1871. And over the course of the next week, there is just this systematic attack of the Versailles against the Commune. Once more, there is no coordination of the forces of defense by the National Guard. The brave keep going and building barricades. The Versailles army responds with artillery, and the National Guard never learns that a barricade does not stand up against all of this. And the upshot of this is, as the Commune is being drowned in blood, finally, about May 24th, they land up executing 60, 70 of the hostages of this. And by this time, the bloodshed is just incredible. Whenever the Versailles forces can shoot down people, they are shooting down people. When they land up capturing resisting soldiers, if they see a man wearing anything suggesting a National Guard uniform, he is automatically taken out of the ranks and shot. Any man in Paris that was not wearing a National Guard uniform was viewed as suspect, as not a supporter of that itself. Those that land up being marched to Versailles, again, are viciously abused. Many are killed along the way. And finally, in the course of what is called the Bloody Week, as many as 30,000 Parisians land up being wantonly slaughtered by the Versailles forces of this. There soon blood is flowing every place. In places, bodies are 2, 3, 4, 5 people stacked atop each other. It's only at the end of May, when the last of the resistance to the Commune has been thoroughly crushed, that some of the European powers, the voices of so-called civilization, especially in London, are saying, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe you've killed enough people already. And meanwhile, the bodies are bloating. Vermin is getting into the bodies. There is this massive fear of disease, pestilence spreading, because of the mass death of 30,000 people, and this is in a Paris of about 1.5 million people, then Versailles decides, okay, enough already. And meanwhile, it takes perhaps anywhere from 30,000 to 60,000 prisoners. Those that survive the vicious march to Versailles are often then marched to the English Channel, where they are put as prisoners on boats outside of the coast of France at this time. Massive court-martials are held, and the court-martials are good George W. Bush court-martials. What is the accusation? Guilty. And the only choice is, does he get 10 years of deportation or is he shot along the way? Stalin never invented the Gulag. France by this time has a thorough Gulag. A lot of the prisoners are transported for years around on transports put on these horrid prison ships and transported to places like Cayenne in French Guyana, to New Caledonia, near Australia, where the living conditions are just as bad as anything Stalin had in Siberia along the way. All the while, the lessons of French imperialism are very, very apropos. If you treat the Arabs in Algeria like scum and you shoot them down, you do the same thing to the communards. If that's the way we treat the Vietnamese, the Chinese, the Mexicans, we do the same thing to Paris along the way of this, where there is just this bloody repression. And among those that are helping the bloody repression are the Prussians, because the parts of the area around Paris that the Versailles don't control, the Prussians do. And the role of the Prussian army is to capture anybody that is trying to flee Paris and hand them over to the Versailles. Interestingly, not all of the members of the German army support the Prussian army or unity. And their way of saying no is they sort of wink at a lot of the communards fleeing, especially Saxon troops at this time, of guys that land up getting into Switzerland. Communards that land up escaping the Belgian are arrested and then extradited back into France of that itself. So it's just this hideous, bloody reaction is constantly sweeping France at this time. And all the while, Adolphe Thiers is projecting himself as the savior of the society of that, but he is not reactionary enough for the French National Assembly. And that the French National Assembly is still in power says something. It was elected simply to ratify the surrender to Prussia. It was not to be a constituent assembly or a lawmaking body, but it's there. And so through the 1870s, France is debating, should we have a Bourbon monarch, an Orleans monarch, a new Bonapartist? And all those groups are so squabbling, they sort of form the very feeble Third Republic. And typical of the legacy of the Third Republic is finally, in 1899, the Republicans claim that they are fighting reaction. And among the groups that claim that they are fighting reactions are the socialists. And there's a number of socialist parliamentary deputies at this time. And among them is Alexander Mirand. And Alexander Mirand figures, I need to join the government of national unity against reaction. And the man that is the defense minister in the government of a national unity is somebody named Gayafet. And Gayafet was the worst personal individual butcher of the Commune itself. And so it just keeps going on with a gore of blood. all associated with this. But I see I'm about 20 minutes over time, and I haven't even touched Karl Marx's role in the Commune, but that's a whole different subject itself. So with that said, I guess we're supposed to open this up to heckling and rebuttals and other such things.